charge of Educator and School Relations at AFS Intercultural Programs, and this is AFS Now live session, Back to Basics, What Makes a School Global Ready? So for the next hour, we will explore some of the elements that go into the mix when discussing global ready schools. And in order to do so, we will be talking with 4 experts that focus on different aspects of the learning continuum, from working with diversity in classrooms to developing tools and resources for teachers to implement global citizenship education in the classroom. So I will invite them up one at a time on stage. We're going to chat for a little while, and they will eventually be joined by all of our experts. And you too will be invited to ask questions and join the conversation. Those here in person, you will have received or on your seats cards that you can fill in with questions. And our volunteers wearing the blue t-shirts will come pick it up. And those who are online, you can join the conversation and post your questions on the comment threads in any platform you're joining us. And to get this stimulating conversation started, I would like to invite to the stage Jude. Heaton. He's the director of the Global Learning Lab at Teach for All. So welcome, Jude. Thank you for joining us. And I would like to ask you, from your work in Teach for All and what you're doing, what does Teach for All considers a global ready classroom?
Thank you. So I think the short answer to that is that at Teach for All, we don't have a single definition of what makes a global ready classroom, and I hope we never do. And let me explain why. There are 3 reasons I want to draw out. The first is context. We work with 53 different partners around the world, and so to give you a few that I visited in the last year, visiting a Maori community in the far north of New Zealand, visiting a farming village in rural Nepal, visiting a school in Medellin in Colombia, where they're dealing with a fragile piece that they've worked so hard to create. What does it mean to be global ready in those 3 radically different contexts? I don't think there is one single recipe, one single thing that children in those different contexts all need. And I think while there are similarities, the differences are also crucially important. So the first reason is context. The second reason is language. There's no neutral language with which we can use to describe particular qualities. So to give you an example, agency, the idea of agency we've heard a lot about over the last few days, the idea of helping children to develop into global active citizens. Even the word agency is a word that is loaded and has certain cultural roots implied within it. So for example, when my colleagues were working with Teach for Thailand and were saying, what are you doing to develop agency? It was a term that they found very problematic in the team. Said, well, this implies certain ideas of individualism and certain forms of lack of respect that we find very difficult in our context. So any language and any words that you use to define global competence will necessarily have their roots in particular cultures, and I would suspect usually in the dominant, powerful cultures. And the third reason, I suppose, is a historical reason. And I would say that when I look at the education around the world, the history of oppression is mirrored in our school systems around the world. So for myself, I come from England, and so much of my education was designed, I feel, as part of a colonial legacy to make me feel like I was capable and competent to make decisions for other people around the world in a way that, frankly, I don't think I deserve or have the right to make those sorts of decisions. And you see that mirrored around the world. So when I worked in Malaysia for 3 years, and as a well-educated English person, people took me seriously. And that is, again, a result of the way that education systems have been replicated around the world. Or again, if we look at, let's say, the Maori community in New Zealand, I spent some time with, or one of the Morais, the tribes in the north of New Zealand. The education system there has been designed in many, many ways to delegitimize that Maori identity. And so if I start saying you need to have these global qualities, these global aspects, how does that relate to the forms of indigenous identity that have been systematically oppressed and pushed down over the generations? So those are the reasons why I wouldn't want to have one single definition. That being said, I don't want to be entirely unhelpful for the question. And so part of my work in the Global Learning Lab is to look across these 53 different contexts. And what we're really looking for is in which classrooms are students growing into a future where they can lead a better life for themselves, their community, and for all of us. And so we try and look for what those patterns might be. And two of the patterns that we do see in very diverse contexts are things like awareness and agency, these two concepts. Despite the problems around agency, in different ways we see that emerging. And that awareness includes developing a deep understanding of yourself, your community, your roots, and also many of the different complex barriers that you're going to face. So we don't all step into the global domain on equal footing. Many of us come from more privileged identities that make that easier, and some people come from communities that have had generations trying to make it harder to make that step. But we see teachers making very brave decisions to try and bring those forms of systemic injustice into the awareness of their students, but combining that alongside a sense of, yes, it's not going to be easy, yes, there are many barriers, yes, certain forms of neoliberal consumer orthodoxy might make it difficult for you, might not be what you want, but here's how we can help you to navigate those things. So we see that awareness and agency being key across classrooms. The final thing I want to say is that we have these patterns that we see, but when we go back, our conversation with our partners isn't now, how are you going to do those things? Rather, we see them as a kind of critical mirror. We say, okay, this is a pattern we're seeing. We're seeing awareness and agency. What might that mean in your context? What might it look like? And what we always struggle to try and do is say, these aren't things to be replicated. What they are is triggers and sparks, and a critical mirror with which you can reflect on what it is that's going to most serve the children in your community, so that they can step into the community identity and a global identity in a way that really works for them and the people they care about.
Thank you so much. Very insightful reflections to get us started. And next, I would like to invite Gabrielle Mandell. She's originally from Canada, but based in the UK as the Secretary General of CISV International. And welcome, Gabi. And as a non-formal education provider, the Children's International Summer Village, CISV, you know from your experience that teachers are under a lot of pressure to do a lot of things and implement a lot of things in the classroom. And what can us as non-education providers, non-formal education providers, support educators? How can we do that to support them to develop global citizenship education in the schools?
Hi everyone, and I should say straight out that I don't have an education background myself, but I certainly watch the news, follow the media, talk to friends who are teachers, and the sense I get is that's quite right that schools are feeling quite pressured to be all things and do all things for all people, and that's a lot of expectations on our schools, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for schools to look at different ways to give new experiences, new content, new methodologies to their students, and also to develop the skills of their educators in that way. And it's an opportunity for engagement with the community around them. So I think that this opens up real possibilities for organizations like CISV, like AFS, to partner with schools in a really beneficial way for everyone, for the schools, for our organizations, and very much for the students and for the teachers. So organizations like ours, like AFS and CISV, share very common mission and values, and we are very mission-driven organizations. So when we want to educate and inspire people to act for a more just and peaceful world, that is an aspiration without limits. The more people we reach, the better. That's always going to be the case. But I think it's fair to say that maybe limit is the wrong word, but there's only so many people that we will be able to reach through our international programs, through our exchange programs or our camp programs. They are incredible non-formal education experiences, and the people who have the chance to go through them derive so much from them, and they're high impact, they're immersion experiences, but we reach thousands of people each year in that way. If we work with schools and we bring our methodologies and our content to schools, all of a sudden we're not just reaching thousands, we're reaching hundreds of thousands. And that means that we are also delivering on our mission, which is to educate and inspire action for a more just and peaceful world, and that's got to be good for everybody. So I would say this is a great opportunity for partnering between community organizations like ours, whether they're local or international, whether they partner with schools in their local community, maybe they know someone who works in the school, or maybe they work through the school system. They really can open up that kind of partnership where more people are getting the benefit and a really meaningful experience with peace education and different methodologies. It might not be the same as our international experiences, but it can be really meaningful, particularly if it's well structured and built on through the school curriculum over time. So there's also, I would say, there's also some really practical benefits for, for the school. They're bringing in new people, they're bringing in new methodologies, their students and their teachers are learning new things. For CISV, for example, working with schools is also on a very practical level beneficial. We are exposing more people in a really positive way to peace education, the work we do. We're possibly bringing in new participants, new families, schools who will work with us to provide campsites, and really building more connections and profound trust in our communities. So for me, the why of why we could work together is really clear. How? That's maybe something that you could take lots of different routes to doing that. One example is a partnership that we've had over the last year or so with AFS, that you've been very involved in, the Effect Plus Mosaic program that mixed together AFS's Effect Plus program with CISV's Mosaic local education program, where we work together to do a sort of a pre-prepared package on the Sustainable Development Goals, and part of that is so that the people we reach through those activities will in turn go out and reach more, and their schools are perfect locations for them to go and do that, for them to go and bring content and also be the people delivering it in their schools. Another big project that CISV has been really happy to be involved in is with our partner Momondo. I don't know how many of you have heard of Momondo, but they were at last year's global conference with us, and they are an inspirational travel search company, and they're very dedicated to diversity and all the benefits that come from travel. And they worked with us to take some of the activities that we do in our program, particularly our camp program for 11-year-olds, our village, and to develop school kits with those, with guidance for teachers and handouts that they can then use in their classrooms. And they managed to work through the school systems in Denmark and Portugal, so those kits have now reached about 2,500 classrooms. We don't have much more data yet because it's new, but this is something to be developed.
Great, thank you so much, Gabby, for sharing, and really like practical examples of what can we do together as non-formal education providers. And next, I would like to invite Aaron Moniz. He's a co-founder at Inspire Citizens. Aaron? Thank you, Aaron, for joining us as well. And I'd like to know from your experience in Inspire Citizens and the work you've been doing and working directly with school communities around the world, how do you get the buy-in and convince teachers and school leaderships that being globally ready is important and that it should be a priority amongst all the other competing priorities they have?
Right, it's a good question. I want to start with just saying I'm Aaron from Inspire Citizens, and I come from the teacher perspective. Right? I was a teacher for the last 10 years before we started this consulting project. And a lot of the way that we work on getting buy-in with teachers and with administrators and with schools is understanding that it's not anything more. It's not anything that you are adding. It's not a competing initiative, right? It's something that you can use global competence to frame everything that we do in education, right? And so, for example, at Inspire Citizens, we have like a global impact schools model where we help schools design K-12 programs so that global competence and education for sustainability is part of everything that they do in their learning. And we run that through something called an empathy to impact model, right? So let's just say you are a Common Core school, or let's say you are an inquiry school, or you're a school that's trying to work on design thinking, right? We're not gonna change or add anything else to it. What we wanna try and help people to understand is that if you get students and teachers to care and connect to something, and you link it to the curriculum or the pedagogical approaches that you already have, and you give students an opportunity to do something with it, that's when we find that learning comes to life through a global competence framework, right? And if you say you've got this standard space, and you're saying, okay, well, what does a community need? What is a sustainability goal? What is a particular global competence or intercultural competence indicator that we want to link to our learning, right? And now how can we do something with that through our curriculum to positively benefit or impact others within the community? It's not changing, it's not adding, and it's taking the stuff that you already have and adding more value to it. And I think, you know, as two connections to that, one is that when you get students to empathetically connect to anything that they're learning, all the research talks about the idea that there will be deeper engagement, right? And with deeper engagement comes deeper learning, and sometimes deeper results as well, right? But we're focusing on the deep learning experience. And also, just that last note too, is that when you work with administrators, when you work with schools, when you work with teachers, when you work with students, everybody wants to be valued. They want to feel like they have a purpose. They want to feel like their job is doing something good for other people. And whether you're working with a student population or a teacher population or administrators, if you can get people to realize, this is what I'm good at, this is, you know, why I'm a great educator, and here's a need over here that I could potentially address, where those two things mesh or mix in the middle is that idea of vocation. It's that idea of purpose, right? And if we can get students to understand that learning can have positive impact on others, if we can get teachers to understand that they're fantastic educators, and that slight little tweak, we can make this an impact project. If we can get administrators and stakeholders to understand that our school can be the hub for positive impact and benefit in our community, then you don't have to work on the buy-in question, because everybody understands it, and it's not something more, it's something that you can use to frame everything you're already doing, and then it's just a matter of choosing where are my logical starting points, and how do I get this rolling in the right direction.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Aaron. And it's really important to bring this idea of the whole school approach, of how much that is key as well to implementing global citizenship education and making schools global ready. And next, I would like to invite Jamison. He's the head of education and training at the Blair Institute for Global Change. Welcome, Ian. Thank you for joining us. And you have experience being a teacher for many years as well, at the forefront of education and helping teachers implement global citizenship education in the classroom. So from your experience, what are the main challenges that teachers face when engaging in global citizenship education?
I think it's quite challenging actually, because I think everyone else has stolen my thunder. We are very much working from the same sheet, because I think that many of the challenges that teachers face are obvious and apparent. We all know what they are. They're all very busy. They all have a great many, you know, every kind of new initiative that comes along is an addition. So you're teaching your classroom staff, or you're teaching your subject, and then someone goes, oh yeah, and do some emotional and social work, and do some of this, and do some of that, and all these other things. And teachers are just ground down by all this, because there are only 24 hours in a day. And very often, you're given all these initiatives, and then your principal or your kind of local management will go, yeah, but actually the thing we're really keen on is exam results, because that's what we're going to judge you on. In some cases, that's what we're going to pay you on. And, you know, people are human. So one of the challenges, I mean, I think one of the answers to that is the point you made about how, you know, it's not an extra. What we're talking about here is doing what we do, and we're going to do anyway, and doing it better, and doing it in a way that's probably better than the way we were doing it, and including these other concepts as well in a way that enables us to be better educators, and to have better relationships in the classroom, and to hopefully generate students who are not just more engaged with the materials that we are being required to deliver to them, but also to their colleagues and their peers and the world around them, and whatever that happens to look like. And going back to Jude's point right at the beginning, and the fact that what that looks like in every classroom is pretty unique, because it has to be about giving the young people a voice to express their own identity, their own perspectives, where they're coming from. You have to start in here if we go out there and if we go over there. So I think there are kind of challenges around getting people on side. I mean, you spoke very passionately about ways in which it can be easy to get people on side. But then there are other systems where the job of the teacher is to deliver the government-mandated textbook and ensure that students pass the exam on the government-mandated textbook. And if you go off-piste on that, you can get in trouble. So how do we help people in those systems to be open to other ways of doing things? And I think very much it's around a step-by-step approach. It's by giving them tools that will enhance what they're doing anyway. It's by working very closely with administrators and with ministry officials to kind of say, well, you know, we can move the dial on this, and you can get what you want. You can get the enhancement of student attainment or whatever it is you're particularly looking for, and address these other issues at the same time. And I think that a lot of the challenges are not with the teachers. I mean, I think although teachers are sort of in many cases struggling with overload, many teachers around the world are really passionate about their students. I mean, I can't remember who it was who said something about vocation, but it's true. You know, at the end of the day, the pay packet's nice, but that's generally not why most people are in the classroom. They're in the classroom because they want to make a difference to those young people's lives, wherever they happen to be, and they're passionate about that. And it's how we help the teachers to flourish and how we can help the systems to be more inclusive and more aware of some of these other things that are going on, other ways of learning, other ways of broadening things out. And that, I think, is that's the big challenge. And I think the way we do that are all the different things that everyone at this conference is doing. You know, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution to global education. There is no one-size-fits-all to PVE or any of these things. What we all need to do is to kind of cultivate an awareness of best practice, demonstrate what works, and kind of one of the things I think as a community of practitioners we need to do better is to have good data, because governments like data, ministers like a graph, you know. If you're going to help people, if we're going to convince people that the work we do has a powerful impact on young people, has a way of enhancing the experience of being a teacher, has a way of changing the nature of societies, we need to prove that. We can't just say, well, we know it works. We need to say, here is the evidence. And we all need to be doing that in our own way, whatever that happens to be. Because then we will be able to convince people. We have to show them it's better, as well as knowing that it's better.
Perfect. Thank you, Ian. And I think you raised very important points, not only having evidence to show the impact and the outcomes of the work we're doing, but something that is key not only for global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, but for 21st century education overall, that is student-centered learning, right? And next, to complete our panel, I would like to invite to the stage Raby. He's the Executive Director of the International Education Program at the Upper Canada District School Board. Welcome, Matt, and I would like to invite you to share with us from your experience, what are some of the ways you have seen schools evolve during the last few years in terms of implementing global citizenship education?
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this great discussion today. So from our perspective with our international education program with the Upper Canada District School Board, we have a unique opportunity to observe 21 different high schools and 63 elementary schools and see how they've really evolved over the years. And it's always impressive to watch the work that our colleagues are doing, the educators and administrators in our schools are passionately applying their vocation, just like we've talked about, every single day, and but particularly related to global competence education or global competence development, and this sort of thing. It's been really interesting to watch the evolution, and I think what we've seen is the most interesting and inspiring ways that schools are evolving is student-driven. So just like we've talked about in kind of student-centric education being so vitally important. One of the things that our board does particularly well is create safe spaces for students to raise their voice and to make sure the voice is not only heard but can be empowered, and we can see that in the day-to-day operations at our schools too. So when I look at how we've approached global competence education and development, again, those opportunities where students have really engaged and become at the forefront of that evolution has been most inspiring. So I think of the example of a group of students who were recognizing that there was an increasingly a larger number of students coming to their school each year from different countries, and realizing, in those first few days, perhaps there was more that the domestic student population could be doing to welcome the students, to make them feel at home, and to make them feel as part of the school community. So they met with an ESL teacher and discussed their kind of ideas, and then a project was formed where they created basically an ambassador club. So the format of that was quite unique in that we would have the domestic students work with the ESL teachers, some other teachers in the schools, prior to the international students' arrival, working on some of those cognitive skills to make sure that they were aware of how to welcome, how to be prepared to kind of address some of the things that would be important for the students as they've entered into their new school, a new country, in some cases a new language that they're learning as well. And then we would have one domestic student matched with a small group of international students to kind of make sure they were feeling more comfortable and leading different activities. So that's where we would get a little bit more in depth into the learning in that sense. So that's something that started from a small group of students, has evolved within that one school, and then we've seen throughout our system several other schools recognize the value of this and the importance, and then adopt this kind of framework. So I think that goes back to the message that we've heard a lot today, and we've heard a lot over recent years, that you never underestimate the power of a small group to be able to make a big change. So that's been quite inspiring for sure. Another one that's come up recently and is more kind of ingrained in the actual day-to-day teaching and learning at the school would be a project that's been created at a coffee house. So we will have monthly coffee houses, and this was again generated by students, a group of students from 3 different classes: a hospitality class, a drama class, and a music class. So the hospitality class is, of course, preparing food, serving food at this event that's been created and open to the community. The drama class is putting on different performances on a monthly basis, and then furthermore, the music class is putting on performances as well. So those students have infused kind of a global flavor through our international students and through different interests that they may have, but just in that ability to understand and work with people from different backgrounds or who may be approaching things differently. I think that's been a really inspirational example, and it's all been because of the bringing that to their teachers. These students have kind of evolved this monthly activity into something that's infused into the curriculum. So they're fulfilling curriculum expectations in the preparations of meals and serving that to the public, so on and so forth. So I think that's been a really interesting evolution at our schools as well, as we kind of realize that the curriculum that we follow is infused with opportunities for global competency development. As you mentioned, it's everywhere, all around us. But just I think it's really important that we maintain the flexibility and make those safe spaces for students to realize that they can be empowered and they can make those changes that they want to see too in the schools.
Thank you, Matthew. And connected to something you just mentioned, I have a question for the entire panel and whoever wants to answer. What do you think is a key element to go from these policies and the school curriculum to get global competence education, global citizenship education actually implement it into the practice of the school? Is there something from your experience that you can highlight that is an element from go, let's say, theory to practice?
All right, I'll start just by saying that when you're talking about implementation, right? Obviously, there's the ministry support that you're going to need, and the different stakeholder support that you're going to need before it gets into the school level, right? But when you are working at a school level, what's really important is making sure that we have the right kind of implementation approaches and supported whole school implementation approaches, right? So, for example, if you can do the right kind of things to get the interested teachers and the champions, on the ground to be able to maybe connect with the administrators and have a conversation saying, I would really like for this to look this way in our learning, right? And then if that is the case and they want to move towards what is a whole school implementation approach, well, that's when we can get into that mission and visioning level. We can understand what model of global competence it is that we want to use. We might understand what is our definition for education for sustainability. And then when we have all stakeholders and teachers and administrators understanding what that is, then we find that we need to then develop what is the right kind of professional learning system to make sure that all 400 or 10,000 or 20 teachers are equipped with the right kind of tools and the right kind of strategies so that all students have equal opportunity to exhibit, explore, and practice global competence. And then when we get to that level, it's like, well, what does the curriculum look like? And how can we design the curriculum together, so that it fits what you already have to teach, but it's flexible enough that it fits your context, it's flexible enough that it serves the needs of the community that we're working with, and it's scope and sequenced in a way that it's kindergarten is doing this, so that grade 3 will be more effective at this, so that grade 6 is more effective at this. And then when we get to that level of curriculum design, that's when you can start to look at what are the other supportive opportunities in our schools, like what student leadership programs can I leverage around global competencies? What youth media programs do I have? What experiential learning opportunities that I have that can be turned into impact-based programs? How can I lobby for community partnerships to be following the same kind of global competence model? And when it comes from that whole school mission and vision level, and there's a supported implementation approach, then all stakeholders feel like it's something that they can do, and it's not a certain group of teachers or a certain group of students saying, oh, I want this, and it can't happen. Right? So I really think that having that full school supported implementation, long-term rollout approach is key to having this done correctly.
Anyone else want to address that?
Yeah, I'd like to build on those points. I really agree with what you're saying. What I want to add is, first of all, I suppose a systemic, and this is the systemic lens to this. So all of us who are working in education, whether within countries or in the global context, are operating in a global environment with international agreements, whether it's the SDGs, international priorities, and so on. And I think fundamentally there needs to be a change of paradigm in how international development operates. And what I mean by that is at the moment, there's a kind of focus on infrastructure projects and particular projects and initiatives. So now it's about digital classrooms, now it's about critical thinking, now it's about, and there's this constant, evolving fight for what the latest buzzword is, and then there are projects and big funding initiatives get attached to that, and then they go through particular governments, and they go to particular regions. And this process, I think, is deeply problematic. It's first of all, it holds power at a central level. If you're setting initiatives centrally, then those are going to get filtered down, and it just, by the time you get to implementation, we get very much the sort of dynamic that Ian described before, of where you've got 50 different initiatives all coming. So I think we need to shift from trying to holding power centrally to really focusing on local leadership development. Now, the downside of that is that it's a much slower process. You get to control the outcomes far less, and power is less held with, is held much more locally. But I think that unless that paradigm shift happens, we're going to keep having this type of churn and change, which will never give the sort of integrated experience that we just heard really eloquently described. And the second point I wanted to add was about how to do that local community work. And one of the things that we're already seeing is this importance of vision, of locally created vision for what a school wants. And critically, in that conversation, it has to involve the whole community, and it has to involve particularly the voices who are usually marginalized. So that includes students that are usually not part of the conversation, and it includes those communities who are generally the ones who are doing least well, being least well served by education systems. And again, how do you hold those conversations in a way that those voices can be heard? It's no good just having a town hall and inviting people in, because the power dynamics of that conversation are already loaded in certain ways. So you need to have a very slow process of building trust, of building authentic relationships, of seeing what people's real values are, which involves going much deeper. And when you have that, then you can get to the sort of dynamic that you described. And when you get to that, then you've got real buy-in and alignment across policy, across community, across parents who say, yeah, absolutely, we're on the same side, and we'll keep this learning journey going. Because if it's just the teachers facing different forces from policymakers in the community, it is not going to be sustainable, and it's not going to work.
I completely agree with those points. I just want to add one thing, picking up on the term you used about safe space. And that's something we often talk about for students, and we're really keen to give students a safe space in which to do their thing. But we all need a safe space. And particularly as educators, teachers need a safe space in which to try stuff and possibly fail. And generally speaking, principals and ministers are not keen on failure. They don't like that. But if we're going to do that kind of authentic engagement with people and to develop materials and approaches that are authentic and embedded in those societies and which are reflected in society, we have to give people a space whereby they can try stuff and go wrong. Because I mean, the world is full of agile design thinkers who are kind of all big on fail fast, make it better. But actually, that doesn't necessarily map over into education terribly well, because people don't want you to fail. They don't want it, because they see education as passing exams. Failure is not a word we like in the education world, but it's something we should be more comfortable with, because it enables us to say, well, this stuff works, but this stuff doesn't. So we're not going to do that. We're going to concentrate on this instead. And I think that creating a space where it's not just students feeling safe, but where teachers feel safe, where principals feel safe to take a punt on something that's a bit unusual, or kind of, within regions, as that kind of, those powers shift upwards, having a more inclusive, safe approach to allowing people to develop the things that are going to work for them. Because I entirely agree with Jude's point about the big flags that get waved internationally of critical thinking, doing classrooms, or whatever it happens to be. Great ideas that come up, that percolate up from underneath. Someone grabs them, makes them into a flag that people wave, commercializes it, and sells it back to you. And then you've kind of lost the magic of it, because it's the approaches that make a difference that are kind of the ones that authentically emerge from the classroom.
Gabby, just you will respond to that as well, but then we have some questions coming up from the audience on Facebook.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, as someone sort of in the non-formal education field, what really was interesting and appealed to me, and what came out of all three responses was that you didn't need to have everything pat and packaged before you did this, that it was a learning by doing process, and it was education as a learning development. You start with conversations, you start with testing things, you build things out, and then you also you arrive at a place where you have an example that other people can look at, and they can use that as inspiration and then build on that. So I think that whole not needing to wait for the international flagship things, but actually doing this on a local level can be very, very powerful.
So we have a question from the audience here. What are some of your favorite tools that teachers can use to develop global competence in the classroom?
I'll jump straight in on that. My kind of favorite tool, as we probably won't be surprised, is dialogue. I kind of regard that as the universal solvent of global education. If you can't, we all need to be able to understand ourselves, articulate ourselves to other people, listen respectfully to what they have to say, be able to interact, to think, to feel along with others. And I think the processes and skills of dialogue are absolutely critical and central to however you're framing your kind of your global citizenship curriculum, whether it's in your classroom, whether it's through a virtual exchange, whether it's online, whether it's an in-person visit. If you can't open up yourself and be open-minded in the way you approach other people, then it's not going to work. And I kind of think that's the fundamental approach.
Yeah, I think to add to that, tools are really important for people to be able to use in classroom, and curricular resources are really important for people to be able to have. And, I also think that framing tools and approaches are really important because they don't rely on this is the thing to do. It allows you to have your creativity and to use your context and your students and be reflective. And for example, not to speak more about Inspire Citizens, but the idea of being teachers, we realize that sometimes you need things like self-study tools to help you realize, well, if this is a benchmark, oh, I could do this, and if I collect evidence in this way, it now becomes proof of concept that I could share with an administrator, or I could share with another school, right? And then they can partner on that and say, oh, I can move to this next level of growth by doing it this way. So I think having frameworks, having self-study tools and opportunities for you to look at your teaching and the impact it's having on students is really important. But then also some thinking tools like stuff that comes out of Compass Education, right? A lot of the stuff, there's some cool organizations like Beluga right now is creating cool resources as well. And I think too, the Asia Society, if you wanted to start with any of their documents, there's a lot of things that you can use to bring into classrooms now, but there's also a lot of really great frameworks and tools that can help you to use reflective learning practices based on your learner population.
I would say that that framework concept is really important because it gives the space for people to figure things out for themselves. It gives you some guardrails, some parameters, but I guess my favorite sorts of tools would be very much the experiential ones where you really take positive responsibility as the learner, both the teacher in a classroom, the teacher and the students, for understanding, for the critical thinking, for figuring out what works for you, and then for implementing it, and things that build that confidence and competence take that positive responsibility.
Sure, so I wanted to kind of steal a line from the title of this talk and go back to basics and say a simple tool that I've seen be really powerful is just controlling the physical space in the classroom. So the dialogue is of course so important, and there's through that kind of physical space we can control the types of dialogue and opportunities that arise. I mean, we certainly can't control the friendships that are created between students, but we can control the opportunities for people of different backgrounds, for students from maybe of different interest groups to get together and have a dialogue and learn more from each other. So I think that's really important too.
And just 3 quick practical ones. Design for change. I think their I can mindset tools are quite good and really easy to use. A second one would be Turnaround for Children. Turnaround for Children do a lot of interesting work looking at the latest neuroscience around learning and translating that into very practical tools, which I think in terms of when you're thinking about how to sequence your learning as a teacher, I think are very, very powerful tools. And third, I feel duty-bound to say that the Global Learning Lab website that we've got, I think, has a lot of really good videos. We've got a guy on our team, Phelan, who does these brilliant videos that tell stories of educators, teachers, and students. I think those can provide really great sparks of insight and discussion for teaching communities and also the students.
Perfect, thank you. And building on that, we have a question that came from Facebook, because now we just gave examples of approaches and practical tools and resources that teachers can use. And we have a question about how can we start with ensuring more opportunities for teachers to engage in global competence learning for themselves. And is this an important step before we ask them to implement into their teachings and in their teaching and with their students?
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen be particularly helpful is teacher exchanges. So giving teachers the opportunity to get out in the world and experience, more global experiences. So that I think that's been important, but of course the means to do that is financially bound and not always present. So I think there are so many opportunities to dialogue with people from around the world through our online connectivity these days, and we've heard, throughout this conference about so many platforms that have been created to really inspire and enable this, and I think that's a huge opportunity. Also just the sharing of videos, talking about the online repository of tools and resources available there. I think that's going to be or that is a great resource for teachers to really drive their own global competency and global learning to prepare them to better educate students in that way too.
Anyone else?
I think also in response to that, there are kind of systemic challenges around what systems enable teachers to do. And I think one of the things we need to all advocate for is a space for teachers to have a kind of their own pathway through their CPD, and for things to be recognised in a way that enables and encourages people to take a risk. And going back to the point about safety, it's very, teacher training is, and teacher CPD is absolutely critical to what education is going to look like, much more so than tech or any of the other things that people talk about. At the end of the day, it's the person in the classroom who is going to genuinely inspire the young people. And it's how systems recognise that. Because many systems, initial teacher training is short, and then you span out into the system, and you may get either very little or no CPD for years. And you might not have an opportunity to go and observe other people. You might not have the time and space to be encouraged to be a reflective practitioner. So I think there's a bigger, wider question around helping systems to acknowledge that if you want better education, then you need better teachers. And the way you can help teachers get better is by giving them freedom and encouragement and space and trust in them.
And just to build on that, I think CPD doesn't necessarily have to take place in a formal setting. Teachers could also volunteer with organizations like AFS, like CISV, and if we were able to recognize that kind of work as the professional skills building process that it actually is, that might be helpful as well.
And if I may, I think we've already had a pretty well-rounded answer to that, and so I'll speak from a perspective just of some of the most inspiring things, experiences that I've ever had as a teacher or as a consultant in education is learning from other students. And I know that we were talking a little bit too about the idea of, sometimes you just gotta try it, and you gotta allow for that impact project to try and take place, because then when those 10 other teachers that are like, we can't do this in our math class, see it, they're like, wait, how can I find more resources, right? What is an online PLM that I could get involved in? Is there an international conference? And I think too that empowering students through, we work to help schools to design or share blueprints for schools to design, business conferences that are based around social entrepreneurship and sustainability. We've got debate competitions that turn into debate for action, right, where the students actually bring actions back from their conferences and go out and bring that into the community. So as much as we definitely need those other approaches, the more that we can empower students to be the ones that are inspiring teachers and community members, that's sort of how you might get teachers clicked into that idea.
Great. So we have one more question to wrap up, coming here from the audience. Some schools here attending the conference heard the term global competence just yesterday, but others already have programs in place for student global competence development. So how do you differentiate to meet schools where they are, different needs they have?
You go for it.
I will start with just the idea of needs analysis protocols and safe spaces for people to start exploring where they're at, right? Because if you come up with a one-size-fits-all approach, or if it is a top-down mandated thing saying you have to do this, but really what teachers need is more professional development on project-based learning, or maybe they need more understanding of what global competence and sustainability is, right? You have to be able to do the needs analysis to figure out what the needs of the teachers and of the community and the strengths of the community are, so that you can tailor your implementation approach accordingly. So starting with any kinds of needs analysis communication is key to making sure that you can differentiate the different needs of institutions.
What he said. But also, I think it goes back to the thing about safety, because schools don't always want to say, we have no idea what this is about. That's quite putting yourself in a vulnerable position to say, we need help, we need to explore this, we don't really know what's going on, we're not doing this very well. No one likes to be in that school that's saying that. So it's creating a space where you can, just like when you're working with a classroom full of students, you start where each individual student is, you can't just go in and go, bang, that's what I did. So the same is with schools, is to find them, is to have that conversation with them in a way that is empowering and is valuing what they're bringing. Because everyone's bringing something, even if they don't really know what they're getting themselves into, they're still bringing something, they're still in a particular place, they're serving a particular population of students, they have a particular group of faculty who have, you know, individual skills and aptitudes that can be built on.
I think what I'd add to these points is the idea that global competence is something up here is just a nonsense as far as I'm concerned. It's the same with critical thinking. There's not some abstract thing that's like, what is this magical UFO that we need to get access to? And yet the way in which we often talk implies that it is, which I think is a symptom of how deeply confused international education conversations can be. And so I think we need to really flip it around and say, well, what we're really talking about here is what sorts of futures we want for our students and our children. We want them to be able to navigate the world. We want them to be able to make sense of it. Maybe we want to help them make a difference to it. They want to be able to challenge these global issues like global warming or intolerance or whatever it might be. So I think flipping the conversation around and really grounding it in, well, what do we want for our students here? And what are the challenges that they're facing that we want to help equip them with skills that can enable them to navigate it? And I think once you start doing that, you sort of switch the conversation, and it needs to be very sympathetic, right? Because so many people make their careers out of mystifying people and saying, I know what this global competence thing is, and I make my career by going around telling you people what it is. And then I'm like, okay, wow, God, I didn't know that's what it was, but this guy's an expert and is getting paid, so I must take him seriously. And so I think being able to find ways to disillusion those kind of conversations, so it's grounded in the needs analysis and in what we want for our children, is a really important thing to do and helps you cut through that differentiation.
Thank you, Jude, and I think that's a really good way to close our conversation. Being Brazilian myself and having learned from Paulo Freire, I really like the term transformative pedagogy, and I think that kind of sums up one approach for us to put this under one umbrella. Of course, there is no one answer to what makes a school global ready, but I think we got some really good insightful reflections here and some ideas on how we can move forward towards this goal together, with, of course, the goal of impacting our students and having 21st century schools and being ready for this diverse world we live in. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us.